Hi there, everybody. I'm Lawrence Webb, IOSH President, and it's my absolute pleasure to offer a massive welcome to this, our final webinar of this four-part series on divergent thinking. Now, from my perspective, I believe so far the series has been an absolutely fantastic success. And despite this being the last of the series, I firmly believe that this is actually just the start of further sessions like this to come moving forwards. So this series has had a golden thread that connects all of them. And today we'll shine the spotlight on employers, what they should be doing to ensure the correct support and mechanisms are all in place to enable everybody to thrive when they're at work. So before I introduce today's panel, I just wanted to give a quick recap for those of you who've not been able to attend any of the previous webinars or perhaps are just playing catch up. So in part one, we took things back to foundation and roots really, and focused on exactly what we mean by neurodiversity and the misconceptions and the preconceptions associated with neurodivergence. We heard about the power of diversity and inclusion and the importance of recognizing and respecting neurological differences. And in the second part, that saw us focus on empowering our future leaders to spearhead change. And that session explored the skills and the flexible solutions we all need to understand to get the best from our own careers and how we can support those that we work with. And then finally, part three gave us a real life case study, and this showcased the positive impact of successful support and communication. And we heard about the journey of an employee and a manager and how they had adopted new ways of working together and brought the best out of one another in the process. And that sort of brings us up to date now in terms of today's session. And, as I said, if you haven't seen those previous sessions, you can catch the recordings through the IOSH website, and shortly there'll be a link to that that's posted in the chat box. It'll be available on the YouTube site as well, but we'll also make sure that you get emailed with the details following today's session. So let's bring on our panel for today, and I'm going to invite them to come on the screen one at a time. So first of all, I'd like to welcome back Fayola Francis, the EDI lead within IOSH, and we were really pleased to welcome Fayola previously on part one, and she gave some fantastic insights. So I'm really pleased to welcome you back, Fayola. Thanks for taking the time.
Thank you.
We've also got Tony Bough of RSA Assurance, and he's with us today, and alongside Emma Case, the founder of Women Beyond the Box. And thank you all for taking the time. Now, rather than me explain to everybody how I know you and the fact we've all touched base with one another before, I'd like to give each of you 30 seconds just to tell all of those people who've tuned in today a little bit about yourself. So, Fayola, perhaps I can start with you. That'll be great.
Thanks, Lawrence. So I'm Fayola. I'm Equality, Diversity and Inclusion Lead here at IOSH, and that means that I help IOSH to embed everyday inclusion as a normal, as something which should be expected and guaranteed as an employer, but also as a professional body. So my role looks both inwards and outwards. I also have ADHD, so I come to this conversation with both that professional side, but also the lived experience.
Fantastic. Thanks, Fayola. And again, thank you for coming along for another one of the sessions. Tony, tell us a bit about yourself.
Yeah, so I work in the field of health, safety and wellbeing for an insurance company. So from my perspective, I assist lots of people with reasonable adjustments in the workplace. So lots of years experience, not just in my current employer, but in previous. I suppose from my own experience, I'm someone with dyslexia and dyscalculia, a word which I often don't mention because I always mess up. And I've got 3 kids, 2 of whom are on the autism spectrum, and very, I have to say, two very, very different children. And I think that's given me a massive insight into how we help people in the workplace.
Absolutely. Thanks, Tony. Good to see you again. And finally, Emma.
Hi, so I'm Emma. I'm the founder of Women Beyond the Box. Women Beyond the Box is a platform that was created to amplify and celebrate and highlight the working lives of neurodivergent women and non-binary folks. We were founded back in 2019 on the cusp of the beginning of a conversation which began to include women within the neurodiversity conversation. I founded the organization due to the fact that at that time neurodiversity really did lack any true intersectionality. Why I was driven to do this also was that without the intersectional piece within the conversation around neurodiversity, we miss something that is truly essential and critical to the conversation. I'm also a coach and a consultant working with global organizations on their neurodiversity and leadership strategy.
That's brilliant, fantastic. I mean, great introductions. Thanks, everybody, and hopefully everyone who's dialed into this today can once again see the experience, the knowledge that we've got on our panel. So it's fantastic for you all to be here. So let's get cracking with some questions. And as before, there's some questions that I've got for the panel, but we'll also be keeping an eye on the questions that you have as an audience as well, because this is the main thing. This is your session. It's really important you get out as much as you possibly can. So let's kick things off, and perhaps if Fayola, I can come to you first. It's a very general question, this, in terms of a bit of a focus on inclusivity and support in the workplace. But as a bit of a foundation for the rest of our conversations, what should employers be doing to support neurodiversity in the workplace, and what should we be implementing to ensure that inclusivity comes from the outset?
I think it's a really good question, and one that I imagine most of the people in the audience have. So I think often as organisations, we try and retrofit inclusive solutions. So we'll have one standard, narrow way of doing things. That's how it's always been done, or that's how my predecessor did it. But we can maybe make adjustments for an individual. So it might be everybody has to work in an open plan office, but neurodivergent people who might be more prone to sensory overload can sit in a quieter corner. So we're moving a little bit from equality, treating everyone the same, to equity, which is kind of recognizing that there are some differences and making accommodations. But really, equity isn't the end goal. You know, we want to be inclusive. We want an environment where we remove those barriers so that people can feel safe and valued and heard. So going back to that example with the open plan office, embracing, say, a more collaborative workspace, you know, where you, rather than having rows and rows of desks, you might have little conversation areas, you might have smaller offices that people can go into to work by themselves. That really benefits lots of people who are neurodivergent. So someone like me, that is an ideal situation. But it's not just people like me or other neurodivergent people who could benefit. Open plan might be a layout that we've used for a long time, but there's study after study which shows that people aren't more collaborative. It's great if you need, you know, if you just want to sit and do your emails, but if you want to work closely with other people, having different spaces helps. So often I bring up that example because most people can think about an office space. I think often it's about being a bit more creative with the solutions, bringing in the people that they affect first and foremost. So making sure if you want to be inclusive to neurodivergent people, that you're involving us in the conversation, that you're asking our opinion, you're taking it seriously. And then you're being more creative with those solutions. So we're not just sort of chipping away with equitable accommodations, making sort of ad hoc changes, but we're being a bit bolder when it comes to designing for inclusion.
No, really good points. And Tony, in your introduction, you sort of alluded to the fact that this is very much part of your day job. I mean, would you have anything to add?
Yeah, and I suppose I would say it is about creating a supportive atmosphere, and we've got an absolutely amazing employee resources group, which it isn't me running it, so I'm not kind of clapping myself on the back when I say this, but it's about people in the organisation who are interested and passionate, not just about neurodiversity, but about ability, about harnessing what's, you'll see in the kind of a variety of different kind of LinkedIn posts, etc., where people will say this is my superpower, because actually, if you do harness people's abilities, and I'll kind of reflect on my own children and go, so one of them, as soon as he focuses in on something, it doesn't matter what else is going on in the world, he's focused and he'll deliver. And I've seen lots of, IT companies especially, who are kind of going, right, we want people that can do this, that will just harness and focus. But I suppose as well, in terms of, and I love the term equity, because you can't treat everybody in the same way. You have to treat people differently so that you can treat them in an equitable and fair way, rather than kind of I do like that as a term, kind of getting away from equality, about accepting differences and plugging into everybody's abilities, so we avoid everything from groupthink and just assist people to flourish. But I suppose I'd also go things like, as well as the because a lot of the things we've said there are on about the designed workspace, but actually, if we also think we want well-designed induction programs, we want well-designed job roles, we want to know as an organisation, because I'm sure people are dialing in, organisations of different sizes, reasonable adjustments are reasonable in different ways for different organisations as well, based on what they can provide. So it's just about, I suppose, getting a level of understanding to see how we can just empower people for success.
Absolutely. And Emma, in your day-to-day role, I mean, you must come across this question on quite a regular basis, I guess. I mean, what would you add?
I think I'd probably go a little bit more general and a little bit broader. In my mind, I think this is a case of the fact that the working world and employment hasn't changed. It hasn't had a real reason to shift for everybody. And so what we have, unfortunately, are very old systems that just exist because they always have. So one of the things that I think is a barrier to many of the things that we're talking about is just a culture of not wanting to shift in perspective. So before we can adapt or adjust to anything, there has to be a shift in mentality. And for many people, they just don't want to. I think that so that is it. So quite often when I'm working with organisations, what I find is that if you have a room of 10 people and you have 2 or 3 of the main decision makers not being on board with something like this, it doesn't matter how many things that you change. If they're not on board with it, you can't push this thing through because they're not behind it. So I think what we have to really understand is who's on board, who's backing it, and those that aren't backing it, we have to figure out what to do with those people as much as anything, because some people are adverse to change.
Absolutely, and I guess organisations around the world are at different levels of maturity in this space anyway. So I think that's a really fair challenge. And actually, if I can stick with you, Emma, because it sort of leads quite nicely into something else I was going to ask about. And when employers are actually advertising roles and writing job descriptions, can you give any tips in terms of how we incorporate this thinking and potential adjustments into the recruitment phase?
Well, that I'll be a little bit, if I'm just really straight to the point about this, that is a really easy thing to do for an organisation who are walking their talk. Okay, this is really simple. If you on a day-to-day basis as an organisation are doing all the things, whatever those things are, there are some very basic things that we can be doing for our employees. If we are doing those things for our ND staff and employees, we're staying connected to them. We have ERGs that are actually active and things are happening. We're measuring things, so we're understanding what is working. You've got a captive group to be asking and to see what is working. So if that is all happening, then you've got this, this group of people, so you can understand what to be writing in it. If you don't know what to be writing in that probably means that your environment might be hostile. You know, it's that simple. What is happening for the people right now? How is it working, or how is it not working? And you can easily write a job spec off the back of something like that. But if you have nobody, you're going to be in the dark. Or if you do have people and you're not measuring and you're not checking in and you're not aware of their day-to-day experience, then yes, you're going to be in the dark.
Yeah, no, very, very good points. I mean, Tony, if I can come to you, I mean, an organisation the size of RSA, you know, this must be something that I guess, you know, you've come across a number of times as well, because you're a big employer.
Definitely, and 100% good job descriptions are 100% important. And then equally, I think you need to accept as an employer, and I'll reflect on both. And I'm trying to reflect on all different sizes of organizations. So what adjustments can you make? What are you constrained by in terms of how does your organization work, if you need to operate certain machinery, certain software, etc. So what is the art of the possible, and being aware of that, and making sure your recruitment team are aware of that and understand the kind of organization which we are recruiting into. I would also kind of, because I think you said the entire recruitment phase, I'd kind of reflect and say, I've been in job interviews, and I'm a HR practitioner as well as a health and safety practitioner, and sometimes job interviews go poorly because the person who's asking questions is asking crap questions, and or is asking too many questions. We tend to kind of put 3 questions into one, and then from a neurodiversity perspective especially, that can be quite threatening, confusing, it's to be fair for anyone. If you ask me 3 questions now, all in a kind of a paragraph of a question, I'll answer the last one because I can't remember the other 2 you asked me. So it's about making sure we ask good questions and set that up for an interview. Maybe I would reflect on maybe a calming location as well. So rather than an interrogation style desk where you're either side of the desk, can you have like a breakout-ish style environment where you're sitting in a more relaxed environment, so you're taking out a level of tension and anxiety? Also, I mean, asking in advance, maybe even giving the questions in advance, because that takes that. So, you know, you arrive at the interview. I'm not saying you have to post them out to them necessarily, but maybe you invite somebody into the interview, give them time to digest the questions so that they can not have that tension and anxiety as they go into the interview. And equally, that can be for absolutely everybody that you invite for an interview. And also, I think we, at times in interviews, and I'm as guilty as this as probably anyone, we don't prompt when we should. So if you know somebody's not giving you the answer, maybe we ask the question again in a different way, so that we give somebody the opportunity to answer us in the best way that they can. I suppose also maybe even different style interviews. So some people will struggle with face-to-face and might do, you know, the kind of interview I'm getting through you now might be easier, or a phone, or so you know, asking interviewees, is there a different way that you would like to be interviewed based on your needs?
No, that's a really good point. And Fayola, in terms of the work you've been doing within IOSH, you know, I know that this is something that's been looked at. But if I can just move on, you know, a little bit, we've talked about a lack of awareness and understanding, and in fact, a lot of misunderstanding around neurodiversity as a whole, and not just in the workplace actually. But how important is it that employers adopt a training approach to assist in that understanding of neurodiversity? Because surely that all fits into everything that Emma and Tony have just said.
Yeah, I think having a decent awareness and that sort of foundational understanding of neurodiversity is so important. We're a fairly major minority, if that makes sense. So it's estimated between 15 and 20% of the population are neurodivergent in some way. So there's quite a lot of us. It makes sense to know about the people that you are going to be working with, that you could be recruiting, who are your customers, your clients. And that need for awareness and understanding is obviously part of why we're running this webinar series. We recognise that it's an area where there are knowledge gaps, and often people feel uncomfortable asking questions. So having these opportunities for learning, discussion are great. But I think it's also really important to make sure that we don't end up in a situation where there's maybe sort of neurodiversity training where it's neurotypical people discussing neurodivergent people, kind of like we're specimens in a lab or something like that. Bringing people in, having a conversation rather than it being a, did you know about these sorts of people, when actually there are people who have those conditions who can talk about their lived experience. And I think that's also really important because having that discussion and sharing people's lived experience, building in the storytelling aspect rather than it just being facts and figures, helps to recognise that we all have really different lived experiences. You might have the exact same condition as somebody else, but be treated in a different way or handle it in a different way or have certain things that bother us more than others. And that kind of goes back to what Emma said right at the beginning around intersectionality. So that's when you have multiple characteristics that may lead to barriers and oppressions in society that intersect, they combine with each other. So I know my experience as a young Black woman with ADHD is very different to a middle-aged white man with ADHD, for example. So making sure that you bring in that sort of diversity of lived experience is so important rather than just general awareness. And then also making sure that people aren't just aware, they know what to do. So it's great if we talk about neurodiversity, but it's so important to have conversations like Tony and Emma have just shared around recruitment. So how do we apply that knowledge? How do we make sure that we're removing barriers and mitigating our own biases at every stage in the workplace?
Yeah, it's interesting you say that, because certainly in my day job, it's something that my employers worked hard on. And, you know, the power of allyship and an understanding for everybody to get the best so that people can thrive, as we said at the start, is really important. But I know, you know, Emma, we've talked about this sort of previously. So what would you add in this area?
Could you just repeat the question, if you don't mind?
Yeah, certainly. No, thinking about employers having almost like an approach to training people and increasing that awareness in neurodiversity. I mean, how important do you think that is?
I'd actually shift away from the word important and use the word critical. Okay. I think it's critical to the evolution of our workplace, and I'd probably go as far as saying it's critical for our society. We know that work life and home life overlap, whether or not we like it. So it is critical, and I think we move away from the idea of importance because it can't be an option. It just simply can't be an option. I think if we can view neurodiversity in the same way that we might view gender, and ask the same question, how important is it for companies to learn about women? It sounds ridiculous. So I think if you really put it in the perspective of we have to, not just from a business case, but from the fact that this is the right thing to do for human beings. The very fact that the future of the workplace is dependent on all people. So we know that when we have just one group of people, regardless of what that one group is, we have bias and we come up against challenges. So there's an importance. It's important to have as many people in the room, around the table, for diversity of thought, for the future of business, but just because it's the right thing to do as well. So it's critical. That's what it is.
Oh, I really like that. I'm in the same space, which is why I was so keen that this became a theme in my year as president, and also talking to people where you know this is their life. I mean, those yes. Real life case studies is just so important, because you can't second guess. You can't put yourself in someone else's mind and assume that this is what it's actually like. And you know, I really like that shift. That's one thing I'll certainly take away from today is not to be talking about the importance, but in fact the criticality of addressing this correctly. So thank you for that. I like that a lot. So Tony, I mean, just coming back to you for a second then, and sort of just thinking about the sort of adjustments and forward planning that you alluded to in your introduction again. So for managers who are looking to do more and implement critical changes, thank you, Emma, Where should they be looking to get resources and information to assist with this and increasing that knowledge and awareness of neurodiversity?
And I mean, it's a great question with unfortunately not a simple answer, because I suppose when you look at neurodiversity, you've got everything from, you know, ADHD, dyslexia, dyspraxia, Tourette's syndrome, etc. So obviously all of those are very different in terms of the reasonable adjustments you may need to provide. There are a variety of different excellent charities that you can actually look at in terms of getting support, even of which you can actually kind of funnel into to provide assessments and support. I suppose when I actually reflect on reasonable adjustments and where to think, often it's really important to make sure that your HR and health and safety departments are actually educated, because to some extent, if we can educate them, we can make sure that they can then provide support, because for some of these, it might be a specialist chair, it might be talking software, it might be altering performance requirements, it might be a buddy system, it might be the way in which we communicate with people. So I suppose, yeah, definitely there's lots of online things, you know, from LinkedIn to looking at the CIPD and looking at on IOSH websites, etc. I suppose for me, the biggest thing though is empowering leaders to have great conversations, because I think where we often go wrong with reasonable adjustments is we don't ask the person, we jump into research. So if you've met one person with neurodiversity, you've met one person with neurodiversity, and I look at my own home and see 3 kids. The middle one is neurotypical, who loves and gets on with the other two. The other two don't get on, like they just don't get one another, because the difference. So you kind of can't apply one thing that just fits. So I think the best thing to do is actually have a conversation with someone, and that conversation, it may be verbal, it may be written. You've probably got to start off with saying how do you like to be communicated with, and then talking with that person to kind of understand what it is that they need. So sorry, and I'm not dancing around that question, because you know you can Google, you can pick any of the neurodivergent things that I've mentioned, Google the charity and find it online now. But even so, you need that conversation with that person. That's the way you'll get the best outcome.
Sure, absolutely, and you know, always remembering the importance. Actually, no, I'm going to correct myself again. The criticality of your line management and your line managers and the relationships that they build through their understanding and their education is massive, because that's a huge enabler, obviously. And Fayola, again, you know, from your perspective with the work that you're doing with IOSH, I guess this is another area that you've been touching on as well.
Yeah, and I would definitely agree with what Tony just said. The best resource if you want to find out how to remove barriers and increase the inclusion of neurodivergent people is neurodivergent people. If you want the experts in neurodivergent experiences, it's neurodivergent people. So there are plenty of organisations that you can use, consultancies that will do workplace needs assessments, that can help with guidance, that can help with training, education, but actually to find out what is relevant, what's necessary, what barriers might exist in your workplace and your work culture that you might not even have considered. Speaking to people is really important. So that line manager relationship is vital. And I think that's the case for sort of all areas of diversity, for all underrepresented groups. Line managers making the time, ring fencing the time for their team, listening to people, asking the right questions, and then acting on the information that they're given is so key.
Yeah, no, absolutely makes sense. Everything that you've both just said. I'm going to come back to you in just a second, Emma, but I'm just keeping an eye on the Q&A as well. And it seems the right time to actually ask a question that's it's for all three of you, but initially sort of aimed at yourself, Tony, in terms of charities you could recommend reaching out to, so whether that's for support, for information, or otherwise. And then so Gary's asked that question, and also Judith's asked something quite similar in terms of, you know, which are the charities I can tap into. I mean, Tony, any thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, well, as I kind of sort of alluded to, so there are anything from the national autism charities, etc. You can literally type them into Google and get them. And I'm conscious, I'm not sure everybody's who's here is in the UK, but a lot of charities. So certainly we've got all of the different charities in the UK that specifically would relate to. So, you know, ASD, ADHD, dyslexia, you know, etc. And we do have the national charities that support that. And I suppose internationally, you could look at the UK ones, but there are different ones internationally as well. We can maybe pull a list together. We can after this of different ones. I suppose I should caveat that IOSH doesn't endorse them or whatever it is that you have to say to say that we haven't checked and endorse them. It's, you know, it would be from my experience of people I've worked with. I'm sure Emma can also jump in and talk about that as well. So
just two things. So one, speaking to the point, which is the major thing here is that it won't be a one and done. This will be an organization committing to being in this for life. It's an ongoing thing, and this conversation constantly evolves and it's changing. Language is changing, the way that we see things are changing. Even the fact that, you know, we're talking about reasonable adjustments, I'm getting wind that we're no longer talking about reasonable adjustments and that we're talking about adjustments, because we come across challenges for what is reasonable as we're moving more and more away from the business case and more towards a humanistic way of doing business, which just fills me with absolute glee. The other thing that I was going to say for people who are looking for support, whether that's from consultancies or charities, is that you really do try to work with people who understand the importance of intersectionality. Your ND employees are not just going to be, aren't just going to look like you, whatever you look like. They're going to come in very different forms. So it's really important, as we're speaking today about neurodiversity, to understand the layers. And that's what intersections are. It's all the different things that you can be, whether it's your physical disability, your sexuality, your age, many different things. So we want to work with people who understand the importance that if you're neurodivergent, you might also fit within other categories as well. So intersectionality is at the heart of this work. So that's what I would say.
That's brilliant. Thanks, Emma. Actually, it's a perfect segue into a question I was going to ask you next anyway, actually, because one thing for me in my sort of career of 30 plus years that has become more and more obvious as time has gone on is the importance of understanding behaviours, understanding people, what drives people to do what they do, the downstream impact of what they do, and what sort of sets them off on that particular path. And just thinking about challenging sort of behaviours in the workplace. I mean, how do employers address issues of negative stereotypes and instances of discrimination around neurodiversity in the workplace?
So I was actually working on this with a client recently, and what I know is true is that an organisation that has challenges with stereotyping and discrimination around neurodiversity probably has it around race and sex and other areas as well, because it's a culture issue. It's what is allowed to happen within that organisation. So if you are struggling with neurodiversity, it's very likely that you're also struggling, whether or not you know it, that is an issue within your organisation. So what I would say, again, it keeps going back to that culture. What do we accept? What do we accept? What is allowed? What is laughed off as banter? It's that. It's really coming to get into the heart of it. So it's right back to basics. One of the other things I would say, though, is that I think the question was worded as, negative stereotypes. I'd argue that it's any stereotypes. So for example, if we're talking about ND people and we keep rolling out this term superpower, there's an expectation for all ND people to behave a certain way and to have very similar characteristics, which in itself can, you'll find organizations looking for these unicorns who, the code breakers and these really fantastic people. Well, I'd argue that equity and equality in the workplace means that you take the wonderful people, but you also take the mediocre people, just as you do with neurotypical people. So it's about understanding that we sit across the broad spectrum, just with any other group. So any form of stereotype is harmful to all of us because we're all different. It's that simple. And we shouldn't, it shouldn't be accepted at any level.
Okay, well, absolutely well said. Thank you, Emma. So I'd like to turn to some of the other Q&A. We've got some brilliant questions coming in and some really good feedback as well, which I'm personally so pleased about because again, I was really keen that we got these conversations going. For some, it's perhaps the first conversations. For others, it's been a real sort of shake of the tree to make people think differently. For others, it could even be confirming that what they've been saying and what they've been experiencing and actually acting upon, is the right way to go. And in all those situations, that's that would be music to my ears. But let's take a comment from Trevor, which maybe if I can come to you, Fayola, first, and then maybe to Tony. But Trevor asked an interesting question. How can we effectively propose office improvements to senior leadership? He says that the world's run by extroverts. They make decisions and often will ignore or laugh at suggestions of anything other than, for example, a noisy open plan office being best for productivity. So, what would you say in those scenarios, Fayola? Because I'm sure that it's more common than we would like.
Use data. I think in that situation, sometimes when you're trying to change people's minds and they're perhaps not approaching the conversation in a particularly open-minded, inclusive or compassionate way, go in with the data. So if we're looking at open plan offices, there was a 2018 Harvard study that showed that people are, I think it was something like 70% less, they spend 70% less time having those collaborative conversations in open plan spaces. People spend more time sending emails and instant messages to the people who might be across the table or around the corner. So using that data is really important, and there's loads of it. If you were to Google just, open plan offices, pros and cons, you can find it there. I think also, though, that speaks to a wider problem around leadership, sort of understandings of how to be a leader, which is often, as Emma said, our way of working hasn't changed hugely for hundreds of years. So being a leader for many people is still seen as being very directive. My way or the highway, I'm the expert, I tell you what to do. Whereas actually good leadership, effective leadership that allows people to thrive, that leads to more productive, happier, more collaborative, more creative teams means listening to people, being compassionate, recognizing that you're not the expert in everything. You're not the best person for every role. Otherwise, none of those roles beneath you would exist. So I think there needs to be a lot of work done around leadership, and some of that is sitting with discomfort. I think as we progress through our careers, we get more comfortable. There are a few situations that are completely out of our comfort zone, and so when something does come up, when someone says, actually, there's a completely different way of doing things, it can feel like a criticism. It can feel like a bit of a threat, and often leaders' response is to be defensive. And actually recognizing that feedback, that idea sharing is a positive, is so powerful. But I know that it can be difficult for leaders to start that journey. It's definitely worth it, though.
Sure, absolutely. I mean, Tony, from your perspective, is everything that Fayola just said resonating there?
100%, and I suppose, and I'll deliberately go off on a different tangent so I don't say the exact same because it 100% resonated. But so I suppose if you're in an open plan office and you can't afford to kind of board up and or you're on a set lease, you can actually buy pods nowadays that you drop a pod in an open office where you can actually, you could then assign that as like a wellbeing room or like a quiet room or, you know, a quiet meeting room, and you can drop several of them or however many you can afford. In our London office, we've got these weird things that look like phone boxes that people, I've gone in one once and I hated it because I felt like I was in this beige phone box, but some people like to go in, and then I'm slightly claustrophobic, so for me it felt like the walls were closing in. So you can do practical things like that in the work environment, but I suppose we actually shouldn't shy away from the society in which we live as well, where you go, we've got two things going on. One is a loneliness epidemic because lots, and certainly in office environments, lots of people have been working from home and are lonely at home. But then equally, at the flip side of that, you've got a level of social anxiety that certainly from a neurodivergent perspective is even more so as we go back into work offices or get asked to come in the office X days a week. So it's about how can we, as leaders, how can we as an employer think about welcoming people back in? We've done a variety of different things. Actually, we shot some, and once again, this isn't me, so I'm not congratulating myself. We've shot videos of the workplace. We've done like team videos where we're kind of going, you know what, this is great. Team volunteering days for charities, helping to kind of go, right, we're getting back together as a workplace community. I often talk to people that go, I've got friends and I've got workplace friends, you know, and it's that's great. So, you know, reconnecting that and supporting that and kind of celebrating that, maybe internal social media to try and do that as well. So using all of those different things kind of help everyone with that.
Brilliant. Thanks, Tony. So if I can come to you, Emma, in fact, I suspect you'll all have a view on this, because one of the most powerful things I think about these sessions has always been the takeaways that people can actually go and reflect on, act on, and so on. So those questions that are clearly coming from those genuine questions that people have got in their own workplace are really important. And somebody's anonymously put in, any advice on supporting someone through change? I mean, change is one of the hardest things that anybody can ever actually sort of manage. But any advice on supporting someone through change? Even a proposal to move a desk in the office has left a colleague being absent from work for a couple of weeks, and we're trying to engage ahead of change. But we're seeing a conflict between the needs of a few versus the needs of a wider employee pool, and they put at the ends, you know, sadly this is the case. I mean, is that something you've got any thoughts on, Emma?
This is the challenge. So, you know, I work with your global organizations and also your smaller startups, and what I've found is that your smaller startups, or not necessarily small, but the startups, whether it's 10 people or 50 people, but this with a fresher insight and a fresher way of looking at things, have started in a way whereby they're doing this from the very beginning. So I'm actually almost I'm kind of sidestepping the question, but what I'm pointing to here is that in my mind, the opportunity for not having to, what I call firefight, is having a truly robust and human-centered probation period. And that then means that everybody gets off to the start that they really need and that they really deserve, so that you're not later on down the line trying to figure things out. So in my mind, this is the thing, we get caught on the back foot now, and everything's happening. So I just think that if you can catch it sooner rather than later, and this is the importance of the recruitment process, but again, the recruitment process hasn't been set up for ND people or disabled people or people who have got chronic illness. So I can't answer that question because it's very specific and I don't know the detail of it. But in my mind, it points to the fact that that the probation period and the recruitment process is long overdue an overhaul.
Yeah, and absolutely key to making sure that we're setting everybody up for success. So yeah, absolutely understand the answer, Emma. Thank you. Fayola, from your perspective, anything to add?
No, I think everyone's actually covered it fantastically, so I wouldn't want to just repeat.
No, that's great. No problem with that at all. So good to see some names I recognise. So we've got Kate Hinder, friend of mine from BITC, Business in the Community, absolutely supporting what you said, Emma, around the intersectionality of stuff and the importance of that, which is great to see. We've got another question here that maybe I could pose to you, Tony, perhaps. Is there a risk that the level of awareness of neurodivergence, particularly among young people, is outpacing the ability of businesses to adapt and educate? And how do you make the business case that this needs to be addressed now?
That is an incredible question, and I'll answer any question. So yeah, I suppose potentially because businesses aren't educating themselves about neurodiversity. One of the things, one of the great things I'm seeing is the fact that organisations are more willing to kind of go, yes, let's learn. I think every organisation, if I'm being practical, and then once again thinking from an SME up to a large organisation, every organisation will always have to say what is reasonably practicable, being really health and safety there, and what are the reasonable adjustments, being really HRE there as well. So if you need somebody to do a set role, then and the role can't change, then either you need to review the roles, or you need to accept that you need a certain kind of person that is able to do that role, and then not set somebody up for failure. So yes, in some organisations, I will, and I suppose I'm thinking. So I've worked construction, manufacturing, public sector, financial services. So especially in manufacturing, if you need somebody to and I worked in a bread manufacturer. If you need somebody to place a certain piece of bread in a certain location and they have to do that, then obviously you make sure that you select people accordingly. Where I am, I suppose, thinking that people are changing. I myself underestimate what my kids can do, to an extent where I almost had a Mexican standoff with my wife, where she's going, "You bought this random product," and I'm going, "No, I didn't buy it." And, "No, you must have, because it's bought from Amazon." "No, you bought it." And it wasn't an argument; it was just more the two of us going, "Oh, seriously, did you get it?" And actually, my daughter, who I didn't even know that. So she's 10 years old. She's on the spectrum. Doesn't communicate really well. Has very many challenges that we support her with. She went on my phone, went on Amazon and ordered a product because I opened a bag of Wotsits and she was annoyed at it. And it's like I had no idea that she could do that or knew that. So often as organisations, we underestimate people. So for me, it is, how can we make sure that we allow people to flourish? Now, I think lots of organisations, what they do wrong is they get the induction process wrong. You try and rush it because you want bums on seats or the equivalent as quickly as possible. If you can review things like your induction processes, actually you can probably allow people to flourish. If you talk to leaders and enable leaders to have good conversations and make decisions themselves, which are outside, as Emma said, outdated policies. If we can work outside of the outdated policies, or even better, update them, then actually we will let people flourish. But yeah, it's moving quickly. I'm over the moon that it's moving quickly, because I look at my kids and smile and think maybe the workplace is going to be so much better for you than it is for all of the employees I've worked with over the years, as much as I try and my organisation tries. So sorry, this is a really long answer to an interesting question, but yeah, I think it is moving at pace. But I think if we think about agility, flexibility, and what's the art of the possible, then actually we can tie that into our cut. we can tie it into all company cultures, and I always say actions speak louder than words. And that, you know, if our company culture is we bring you in, we burn you out, we replace you, then it's not a great company culture, and it's not mine. But then you own that. But if it is that your company culture is we bring people in, we enable them to flourish, then, you know, reflect on that and see how you can make people flourish.
Okay, thanks, thanks, Tony. A quick one for you, Fayola, from Chris Nielsen. Hi, Chris. Good to see you. I haven't seen you for a while. Good question. So many companies provide written risk assessments, method statements, and sort of, you know, procedures generally to employees. And obviously, dyslexia can range from severe to mild. So, if someone with dyslexia signs to say they've read and understood these written instructions, you know, should we assume that that is actually the case, or should we be looking for another method of communication? And also, what adjustments can be made with that in mind? Is that something you want to have a crack at?
Yeah, definitely. I think regardless of whether or not someone's dyslexic, this is a time when we can think more creatively. So kind of going back to what I've been saying throughout this, do we have to have everything where it's a big, long written document with lots of legal language and lots of acronyms, and where it can be at worst unintelligible, at best boring? Most people aren't going to read them. They're going to flick through them, regardless of whether or not they're dyslexic. So actually looking at the ways that we communicate information is key. Can we make it more engaging? Can we do a short video? Can we pull out the key things that you need to know from these instructions? Can we find different ways to communicate the same thing? And if you're dyslexic, that can be really helpful. If you're like me, I am awful at reading a big long document. I find it really difficult. Even simple things that if you do have to have written documents, if there for some reason you've got time constraints or whatever it may be that means that you cannot possibly do things in another way, there's some really basic things like making sure that all of your documents can be read by a screen reader. So I use screen reader technology. I know lots of people do. It's a really helpful tool for a whole range of different conditions, but also if you're busy, if you're tired, if English isn't your first language, it can be beneficial. And if you put all your information up as a PDF, for example, lots of screen readers might struggle there. So thinking about how you can make those adjustments sometimes, but I think overwhelmingly the aim is to create work environments, work cultures where we don't constantly need to be making adjustments, where we're being inclusive by design.
Absolutely. I mean, Emma, from your perspective, would you add anything to that, or?
I think it's pretty much all being said, but I do think that it's just so important. I think we have to acknowledge that everybody within organizations, everyone's working to constraints. And I think if there was, you know, what there is more often than not is a shortage of time and resources. And so that's what we're up against, which can then cause problems, you know, of their own. But ultimately, what we're really talking about here is beyond the business case, is what I hope would be beyond the business case. And what we're talking about beyond all these, you know, the ticking the boxes and all the rules and all the different, you know, all the different strategies and whatnot, is a spirit of empathy and being able to find that time and make that time to just check in and make sure that we're being human-centered and we actually care, because there's no reasonable adjustment. You know, we can get to the very end of the line with reasonable adjustments and just realize I'm just not caring enough. Do I care enough about this person? Because the person who cares can find a way, and it's that simple.
Okay, thank you. Listen, we've got so many great questions coming into the Q&A, and believe it or not, we've only got about seven or so minutes left. So I'm sure the panel wouldn't mind me saying that we'll take a look at those questions that we've not managed to get through so far, and we'll come back to you, because they're all great questions. And if they're certainly based on what you need from a day-to-day perspective, then clearly that it's important that you get an answer and you get some the support that perhaps you're looking for. So I do have one final question though for each of the panel members, and maybe if we can start with yourself, Emma. You know, the takeaways from these sessions, as I said earlier, are the most important things. So if you could encourage employers to do anything differently to promote and act more inclusively for a happier working environment, what is it that you would actually say to them to do?
I think I would go back to my very first point, which was you have to really be honest about what your culture is. We are in a time where there are so many organizations reach out to me about individuals that work there. And when we scratch beneath the surface, what we have is a work environment that is just not going to allow anybody to flourish, never mind an ND person. So this goes beyond neurodiversity. What is the health and the quality of your organization? Are you doing what you need to do so that people can come in and do their very best? So that's the thing. Take a long, hard look at yourself and ask yourself, are we doing the best by our employees?
Great stuff. Thanks, Emma. Fayola, if I can come to you next.
So if I could encourage employers to do one thing, it would be to centre neurodivergent people rather than it being sort of an afterthought. So coming up with a process, for example, writing a risk assessment and then thinking, oh, how do I make sure that this is accessible for someone who's dyslexic? Be inclusive by design. And also, if you're centering neurodivergent people, because, as I said, we're a pretty major minority, that means you're centering so many different people. Within this call, you have 3 panelists who are neurodivergent, but will also have very different lived experiences, bring lots of other characteristics to the table. So it's recognizing that difference and building that inclusion in from the get-go, rather than as an afterthought or, you know, a reasonable adjustment or you know, just trying to patch things together at the end. Be inclusive deliberately.
Fantastic. Thanks, Fayola. And Tony.
It's rubbish going last because they've just both said some really cool things, and I now have to say something different because otherwise I'll just go what they said. But no, I suppose to deliberately say something different, be authentic as an organisation and empower your leaders, your managers to have good conversations, because everyone's different, and this isn't just for neurodiversity, let's be honest. It's enable them to have difficult and good conversations with people when they might not really want them, so that you can actually understand what people need so that they can flourish.
Brilliant. What a great way to finish this session off with. So, you know, with just a few minutes to go, just a few things to close off with from my perspective. I mean, first of all, of course, a huge thank you to the 3 of you for your time and your hugely valuable insights today. And obviously, thank you to those of you who've taken the time to come along and listen. And I hope that, as has been the case with the other sessions, that you've got lots to take away. And as I say, we will try and close out those other questions as well. So, you know, we've had 4 sessions over 4 hours. This hour for me has absolutely flown by yet again, and we've only just scratched the surface. And I think Kate Hinder from BITC, I think you made a similar comment in the comment section of the session today. But for those who've been here from the beginning, and maybe some of you have got to play catch up with a couple of the sessions, but I really hope you agree it's been a fantastic series. And I also genuinely hope, and I will certainly drive to make sure that further work's done on this topic, because I think this background information and this sort of foundation conversation is so important, and I hope that we don't have to wait too long before more sessions like this come back to us. And with that in mind, you know, and helping us with planning future sessions, there is a short survey that I know has popped up on the screen already. But one thing we'd like to know is what would you like to see in terms of discussing this going forward? Because I don't want the conversations to stop after just four webinars. There's so much that we can take from each of the webinars and so much more we can do as a result. So please take some time, if you haven't done already, to give us some feedback and let us know what you think needs to come next, because we absolutely want to carry this theme on. So please don't forget, there are recordings of the other 3 webinars as well that you can actually get your hands on through the IOSH website. There'll also be a link in the chat. And again, you'll get emailed separately by the end of the week with details on this one anyway. And on one final and personal note from me is I instigated this because my daughter has autism, and it's actually improved my world. It's improved me as an individual because I see things differently. I think differently. I think I'm more inclusive in what I think I do and I say. And I just think my world is better as a result of having completely opened myself up to a different way of thinking and all the benefits that come with that. But the conversations we've had over these 4 sessions, and again, in terms of some of the challenges that we've had back today, this is a conversation that absolutely needs to become the norm. The more that people understand, the more that we can appreciate the complete and utter inclusivity in everything we do, just as the way we do things around here means that we'll be better placed to make better decisions, be better teams, be better individuals, and in terms of our global world of work, just be a better place for all of us. So once again, thanks very much to you, Fayola, Tony and Emma for your time today, and for being involved in pre-conversations and all sorts. And I hope we'll very much keep in touch and keep these conversations going. As I said, I hope it won't end here. I'm sure it won't, because I'll keep driving it. Thank you all for attending today. I've been Lawrence Webb. Goodbye.